Welcome, everybody, to the Jesus in Family and Ministry podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Gray. Super excited to have you guys here today, and very excited to have our guest, Brother LJ Harry. And, sir, it is a privilege to have you on today.
Oh, thank you. It's a privilege to be on today.
Yes, sir. We're going to pray and open up, and then we're just going to dive into it after we pray. Father, we come before you. God, we thank you, Lord, for this moment in time to be able to
Thank you,
discuss
Jesus.
this mandate, Lord,
You're
that we have as
so good,
fathers, Lord,
God.
to lead our homes and
I
lead our
ask you,
families. And
help us,
I
Lord,
pray,
to
God, for
be
those who are here this
dads.
podcast,
Help us
God,
to
that
do
your
what you've
spirit,
called us
Lord,
to
would
do
touch
as
them. I
dads.
pray, God, that you would speak
I
through
pray for
us. So,
this
God,
family,
and I
Lord.
pray that this
Listen,
discussion, Lord, would help
Jesus,
someone
pray for
um,
those who will love you and
be
love their families.
galvanated, God, be moved to improve
Help our
where they
families,
are, God, and
our
see
dads to
that they can
listen
be
to their
so much
children,
more, God, than what
love
maybe
their
they are right
children,
now, God.
be there
Encourage
for their
those who are
children.
doing the
I
best
pray,
they
Lord
can, God, to
Jesus, you would raise
continue
us up
moving forward.
to be what
We
you've
ask
called
today,
us
God,
to
that you
do
be
and
with
called us
us.
to be.
And God, we give you
We ask
glory
you, Lord,
and we give
equip
you
us,
honor. In
encourage
Jesus'
us,
name we pray.
inspire us to do what you've called us to do,
Amen.
Jesus.
Amen.
Amen.
So,
Amen.
Yes, sir. So, Brother Harry, it is awesome
Yes,
having you
sir.
on. And I know
Thank you
looking
so
at,
much, man.
yeah, I'll be one of those people who's just kind of, I follow people and at a distance, don't necessarily always interact or like jump in, but following you on social media in different places. And it's been a joy to watch there. And then, got introduced to you about 3 years ago or so when you came in and did camp for us here in the Virginia district. And really was looking forward to this discussion today just because of talking about communication. But before we jump into all of that, I want to ask you to kind of give some background on yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Okay, sure. Absolutely. Well, again, it really is an honor to get to be on with you and all of your listeners. My name is LJ. First name is really Lloyd, which means the old gray-haired one. So I obviously don't want to go by that anymore. So
Understood.
the older I get, the more gray hair I get, the less I want to go by that. So yeah, my name is LJ. I am the follower of Jesus. I'm the husband of Andrea, whom I call the lovely. We've got two daughters, McKenna, who will be 17 this month, and Rayleigh, 13. And
Nice.
before I moved here to St. Louis to work as director of curriculum, I was a pastor in my home church, Mount Vernon, Ohio. So primarily, my whole life, actually my entire vocational life, I've been involved in ministry on the local church level, and then just recently on the more organizational level, working with curriculum and feeding shepherds who feed the sheep as opposed
Yeah.
to feeding the sheep on the local level. So
Yeah.
we're in a great state of transition right now that I'm still getting my feet underneath me to know what it means to serve in this role, but I'm enjoying it. I
Yes,
really
sir.
am.
Yeah. I know there's some people who I know that have worked with you for different things, and I believe in some good things are going to come out of it, and looking forward to what happens there. Um, I know my big thing when
Thanks,
I
man.
was looking at this topic today, which was talking about just communicating with our families, and I think for men that can probably be one of the harder things for us to do sometimes is be able to express things and talk through things, and
Yes.
we're taught from a really, I won't say we are always taught, but most of the time you hear as far as men go that we're not the emotional type. You're not, we don't communicate well, things like that. Um, and what I have
Right.
found, being a husband and a
Exactly.
father, me and my wife are going on 10 years of marriage. And one of the things I think that probably gets told to me
Awesome.
the most by
Awesome.
people who are way down the road is communicate, 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 communicate. And with
Yes, sir.
that,
Absolutely.
Yeah, and with that, I wanted to know from you. You are a phenomenal communicator. I mean, watching you talk to a crowd of I want to say preteens, early teens, talking to a group of adults um, in the same room, same time. Communication seems to be one of those things that you have mastered. Would you say that it's a gift or like a skill, or would you say that it's kind of a combination of both?
I personally think it's a combination of both a gift God gives and then a skill we cultivate. I really believe communication solves a lot of problems, covers a multitude of sins.
Yeah.
As a husband, my one of my privileges is communicate with Andrea, so she knows what's going on in my life, what I'm thinking, and all that. And yet, still, as just as a typical man, I fail to communicate so many times. I cannot tell you. I can't count on all my hands or feet how many times over the last 22 years, 7 months, and 9 days. Which, by the way, happy Pie Day. Today is Pie Day. If
Yes,
I got a
sir. I
coconut
saw
cream
that.
pie, it's a better Tuesday. Yes. So the communication, how many times I have not been where I needed to be at the time I needed to be there, and it would have been all solved had I just said, "Oh, hey, babe, don't. I just want to remind you, I'm going to, or I won't be able to." So it comes difficult,
Yeah.
even to people who live to communicate. I communicate for a living, so I say that to say none of us gets it right all the time, but I do believe the ability to communicate with people is both God given and a skill to cultivate, and the my primary mode of communication is through story. I read
Okay.
the Gospels and I see Jesus communicating all the time with people. He communicates with shepherds and with seed sowers about seed sowers, and they understand what he means. So I
Mm,
aim to communicate on a level that everybody in the room, if they're young, if they're not young, if they're very educated, or if they're very simple, can understand. So while it is, I believe, a gift, I also think we have to work hard to make sure we're saying what we need to say, listening when we need to listen, and then also saying it with our body language in such a way that people understand this is what I mean.
yeah. So, what have you found as being so transitioning from communicating to a group of people to transitioning talking to um, your family?
Hmm.
How do you take the skills and things you have? And let me ask it this way. Sorry. Did you learn how to communicate better at
Sure.
home, or did you learn how to communicate better publicly and then bring it home?
It's odd. Most people don't want to be public speakers. They
Yeah.
would rather sit in a dentist chair surrounded by snakes than be a public speaker. But it's easier for me to communicate to a crowd than it is to a smaller group. And then I'd say probably even easier to communicate to strangers than to family, because family knows everything. They know your
Yeah.
history. If I'm communicating, if I'm having a devotion with my girls and I'm sharing a devotion about controlling our anger and letting the Spirit of God control our anger, but they know that just 2 days ago I got mad at somebody in traffic and was like, "What do you think you're doing?" It's very
Right.
easy for them to call me on that. But if I'm addressing a group of 500 junior hires about controlling your anger, they have no idea that I just
Mhm.
yelled at a guy in traffic. So it's harder, and it involves a whole lot more apologizing and a whole lot more saying, "I know I blew it 2 days ago,
Yeah.
but this is where God wants us to be."
Yeah.
So, and being willing to acknowledge that. So it does translate from the public sphere into the home, but whereas I communicate namely in the public sphere through stories, my own stories, biblical stories, in the home, I don't want to communicate unless we're having devotion.
Yeah.
I don't just want to use parables and stories at home because I don't want the girls to think I'm just preaching at them,
Right.
or that dad the preacher can't just be dad the dad.
Mhm.
So I think it is harder to communicate at home than, and I know this is the odd thing. I know people who are absolute phenomenal communicators in the pulpit who are really poor communicators in person. And
Wow.
so that's a skill to work on, just making sure that we don't just give it all in the youth room or the pulpit or the sanctuary or the tabernacle
Right.
and then have nothing to give when we get home. As men, most of us, many of us may understand that men usually use fewer words than women per day. And so what could happen is we communicate so much to others that by the time we get home, we're just wiped out verbally,
Yeah.
and we don't want to say anything or listen, and that causes problems.
Yeah. I've heard that before. That, I mean, I forgot what the actual ratio is, but it's like thousands of words difference between what a woman uses and what a
It's
man
it's a
uses.
it's unreal. Now, yes, the lovely tells me, she says, now in our house, those are switched. But I tell her, but my job is communication. I communicate for a living. So
Right.
I'm not talking too much. I'm working out. Like this is
Uh,
exercise. This is I'm
Yeah.
strengthening these muscles, which I'll use for the glory of God one day. So she's not buying it.
No, no, I can understand that. Um, but it is, I think I have a job where I communicate a lot. Um,
Hmm.
Managing people, is practically always constant communication, whether it's directional or just encouragement or recognition or, correctional. You're always
Sure.
constantly using the words. And I know for me, what I have found is when, there are those times where I get home and it's like, okay, so, my wife and I, we have 5 children. One of the youngest one's about to turn one into April, but the other four are very much so vocal and there and
Awesome.
excited, and they want that energy, like, bringing that same energy that you had at work, as far as like, being upbeat and
Yes.
there. And you're like, I don't know that I have that to give. What have you found to kind of help
Right.
you
Right.
go from work to family and be able to, pour into your family in such a way as to let them know that they matter and they are important in the moment?
Exactly. I have found, first off, when I was in Mount Vernon, I had an 8-minute commute. Now, if I rode my bicycle, it was 12. But if I drove my car, it was 8. It wasn't near enough time to decompress.
Yeah.
So I got home, and if I was in my car, I have this. So once again, I mean, my word count is astronomically high for a man. So I would get on the phone and talk to friends. Well, it's 8 minutes. We hardly even get past, man, how you been? Good. How you been? Good. Good. And I'm pulling in my driveway. So I'd
Yeah.
walk in with the phone glued to my ear, and Andrea would just look at me like, really? You're gone for 8 hours and you show up and you're not even with us when you are here?
Yeah.
And I had to learn that when I get home, I need to be home, not
Mhm.
just physically, but mentally, emotionally. I need to be available to my family, to be present. Many times, especially when my girls were younger, when I got home, they wanted to run to me and give me a hug and tell me all about their day and what star they got. But I'm on the phone with a friend
Yeah.
from Mississippi or Arkansas or Kazakhstan.
Right.
And they look at me like, I thought you're home. So
Yeah.
what helped me was a rebuke where they pretty much said, hey, when you're here, you need to be here. What
Mhm.
helps me now is keeping that in mind, but also I've got a 15 to 18-minute commute. So I
Nice.
have some time to decompress when I leave the office. And that commute really does help. I just clear my head, clear my mind, try to keep off the phone. And so when I'm pulling in the driveway, I've had time to just release some of the pressures and realize that I'm about to go to a sanctuary. It's
Right.
been hectic and frenetic and hitting deadlines at work, but I'm about to walk into a sanctuary with 3 people who love me more than anyone else loves me on this planet.
Yeah.
The least I can do is be the best dad and husband I can be and be available, be present, and try, even if I'm tired, try to bring that energy level that they need and they deserve. Andrea tells me about her dad and how awesome her dad was growing up. She said he would come home from work and she knew he was absolutely wiped out and exhausted, and yet he would wrestle with her as soon as she saw him. She would run to him, and just they would wrestle for a long time.
Yeah.
And she looks back on those days now and says, "You know what? I realize he had to be wiped out, but he took the time." And that,
Yeah.
to this day, when she speaks of her dad, those are some of the most fond memories she has of him, are the
Wow.
times he took with her, even when he was tired.
Wow. I know,
Yeah.
it can be, it can be so difficult to realize the impact that, those moments have. Um, but it kind of takes me back to a moment where, so my dad was in the military, and we
Okay.
used to make, when we were driving, he was driving somewhere, and I was riding with him when I was a kid. He flew helicopters in the military, and
Oh,
we would
so
have these
cool.
moments. Yeah, we would have these moments where, we're driving and it's nighttime. The whole dashboard's lit up or whatever, and we would play like we were flying a helicopter. And he's like talking the talk they would talk when they're flying and all that stuff. And
Oh,
I
bro.
remember those moments, and it
Mm-hmm.
came back to me one day. We were actually, it was our wedding day, which is also on my dad's birthday, and as I was just remembering my
Oh,
dad, I'm at
cool.
the mic and talking about, family and stuff like that, and at the reception, and I remembered that moment. And as I began to talk about that moment, like I could see it impact my dad. That moment of,
Mhm.
it wasn't a whole lot of those moments, but just the fact that it meant something to me. When he could have been
Exactly.
driving thinking about, what was going on in life, bills that had to be paid, or what was going to happen next at work, and whatever else was going to happen, that taking that moment to say, okay, let me have some fun with my son, let me enjoy um, those memories, and then being
Yes. Yes.
pulled out to the garage to sit in the cold garage while he was working on the car. um, were those moments of
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Exactly.
I look back at now and I'm like, I wish I could take better advantage of those moments, conversations that we could have had if I had known that was a good time to have that conversation. And it really pushes me now to try to make
Right.
sure that I'm
Exactly.
engaging with my kids and helping my kids. Um,
Yeah.
looking at
Can
communication
I
from the,
add one more thing?
oh, yeah, sure, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to add one more thing. Dads, we do this as husbands too. We feel like if we do something extravagant and lavish, then that's going to buy us, I don't know, like 2 months or something. So let's say, for example, it's
Right.
it's our wife's birthday or Mother's Day or anniversary or something, and let's say we just take her on a cruise, and
Yeah.
I mean that's just wow, that's awesome. That's expensive. It's a lot of time and all that, and then we really don't do anything, a date night, flowers, a card, anything for the next 6 months because in our mind, and we still have credit
Mm,
from the cruise. That's not how
yeah.
it works. And
Mm,
the same is true with our kids. We can be guilty of thinking, well, we're going to Disney in the summer.
yeah.
So that's a big trip. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of money. That'll buy me credit. But really, I really believe, and it's like in our relationship with God, I believe our kids, our family wants more consistent as opposed to just gargantuan, lavish
Yeah.
installments of time.
Yeah.
So, whereas certainly they do appreciate those others, you'd be amazed at how quickly that credit can wear away
Yeah.
if you don't do anything to really improve that
Yeah.
relationship on a consistent daily, weekly basis.
Yeah. Yeah. It's was that old the analogy of, a bank account, and if you aren't steadily working and putting something in there, there's gonna be a point in time where you go to withdraw and there's nothing
Yeah,
to take out because you've not
exactly.
put anything in. And I think sometimes we think because children are so resilient
Exactly.
that it's easy to just kind of, they'll be okay, like you're saying, they'll be fine, they'll be all right. And I had a
Right.
moment.
Right.
I'm gonna have to be very transparent here, but I had a moment actually
Sure.
not too long ago where I had to apologize to my son because it was a moment where he needed me to not be stern dad. He needed me to be loving dad and communicate to him,
Yes.
through my
Yes.
actions that he was
Yes.
okay, everything was fine, like you're gonna be all right. And one of those moments, I absolutely just blew it. And when I came back to him,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Hey, bud,
I get that.
Daddy's sorry." And he was like, "For what?" And I'm explaining to him, Daddy got mad, and he shouldn't have got mad. I should have been there to just let you know you were okay and everything was going to be fine. And my oldest son, has this tendency to just be like, "Oh, it's okay." And I'm like, "Bud, no, it's not okay. Like, it's not okay. Daddy does that. Like,
Sure.
Daddy needs to make sure that that in that moment when you're like, you're 5 years old. So what's going on in your life is huge and momentous, and it may not seem like a big deal to
Yes.
me, but it
It's
matters to you."
huge. Huge. Yes,
It,
exactly.
and it is, and we can
I've
forget
done that
that.
billions and billions and billions, billions of times. Yeah.
um,
Oh,
but we
yeah.
can forget that because, at
No, you're
work,
you're absolutely
what
right, bro.
what mattered to us was the fact that, this certain deadline wasn't hit, or this particular thing was going on, or this thing was missed. And so to us in our world, what my 5-year-old son is dealing with is small, it's insignificant, it really doesn't matter that much. But to him in that moment,
Right.
my ability to be present, and I'm realizing this more and more, my ability to be present and move away from trying to look at it through my lens and look
Yes.
at it through his
That's
lens.
so very good.
Has been probably
Yeah.
one of the most challenging things
There,
as being a father.
but it's one of the most important. We forget quickly what it was like to be in, like my girls right now are high school and middle school,
Yeah,
11th grade and 7th grade. Yes. And we forget what it was like to be in 7th grade. Like I look at it now and I'm looking at my responsibilities and obligations, and that's to provide for a family of four, to make sure I get all of my work done, make sure I'm following the call of God, make sure I'm having my devotion. So if my girl who's in 7th grade comes home and she's stressed out, I can devalue that and say,
yeah,
stressed out about what? I thought they didn't have lasagna at lunch today. And
yeah,
forget what it's like to be an awkward middle schooler, finding yourself. Your body is changing. Your identity is still just kind of up in the air. Like, who am I going to be? What am I going to be? What am I going to do? So it's very easy to forget that as an adult. I have to try to remember she's 13.
yeah,
Who cares? She doesn't care about mortgage. She cares that the friend she thought was her friend
mm,
just totally ghosted her, and now she feels she has no friends. And
yeah,
I can look at that and be like, that's nothing. You're paying a mortgage? But she looks at it and says, Dad, I thought she was my friend.
yeah,
So I have to try to remember what it was like to be where she is. And I do not like the philosophy of, well, I made it through, so you're going to have to do it. I
mm,
don't think that's a healthy way to treat the next generation. I don't think it should be, I suffered, you have to. I think it
right,
should be, I learned some things along the way. Let me share with you what I learned. So you don't have to suffer through the same things I did. They're going to go
yeah,
through hardships just because they're alive. So I don't want them to just, I barely made it out. Let's see
right,
how you do. I don't think it's healthy. We didn't want that.
right,
I certainly don't want that for my girls.
yeah,
So yes, and kudos to you for being humble enough and man enough to apologize to your kids. One day, Lord willing, if and the Lord tarries, one day your son will say the same thing to his and say, "I'm sorry," and he will have learned to apologize by watching you. And if I was wearing a cap, I would tip it. I commend you for being a good dad.
yeah. I mean, one of the things I
But I can't wear a cap because the building policy says no hats indoors.
no hats allowed. Um, that being
No
said,
hats allowed. No hats here.
no hats. That being said, how have you worked through those difficult situations and times where you've absolutely blown it, whether it be with your wife or your children?
Oh man.
Because I think our tendency as men is to kind of, when we blow
Hmm.
it, is withdraw.
Sure.
Is to withdraw and then hope my, kind of like you were saying earlier, my actions say I'm sorry. Um, versus putting in the work. How
Right.
have you found ways to like work through that to mend those relationships and put things back together?
Man, I've said I'm sorry so many times that I wonder, it's almost like a post-it note. I think the sticky is wearing off, but I mean it each time.
Yeah.
I just find myself saying it a lot of times because I'm a typical man
Yeah.
who just doesn't think all the time. I have found myself, I really blew it one time, and it wasn't just a one time thing, it was a compilation that led up to a one time thing. And I realized it when my daughter, I don't know, she might have been 4 or 5 at the time. But I came up to her one day. I was leaving to go out of town on a ministry trip. I came up to her and said, I love you, Rayleigh. And she said, bye bye. And it hit me. She equates I love you with I'm leaving.
Mm,
And what hit me is, first off, I'm leaving too much. And secondly, I'm saying I love you too little. Clearly, when I say I love you, if I'm leaving way too much. But
wow.
I'm not saying I love you enough if the only time she hears it is when I'm walking out the door. I blew it big time.
Wow.
So that was one of those times I came home from that trip and I set my calendar in order and I talked to the family and said, okay, so I need to pare down how much I'm away and really focus on my time here at home.
Yeah.
When it comes to blowing it with Andrea, as far as just as a husband, on those times when I really just blew it, I come to her and say, I'm sorry. And I do my best not to qualify it, not to excuse my behavior, but to say legitimately, I'm sorry, not to blame anybody else. Because as men, we are prone to justify or couch or mince or excuse. For example, hey, you know what? I'm sorry I said that to you. Had you not been rushing me, I probably would have been. That's not an apology.
Right.
I'm sorry for this. You know, I've been under a lot of stress at work lately, and that's not an apology.
Yeah.
I just have to come right out and say, "Hun, I'm sorry. You deserve better. I should never have treated you like that. Shouldn't have said that. I should have been home when I said I'd be home. I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
promise I will do my best to do better." I, that is the only real way to apologize when you blow it. And I have apologized to my girls many times when I blew it, and for the same reason you do. First off, it's the Christian thing to do. Secondly, I want them to know that when you blow it, it's okay to admit it. In fact, it's right to admit
Yeah.
it and then to make it right. It's amazing. I don't understand how it works. I'm sure there's a study, but it's amazing how there can be tension in air
Yeah.
that all of a sudden goes when you simply say, I'm sorry. But man, those are hard words to get out. They're three syllables, but they're really hard to say.
It is. It is. Saying I'm sorry and saying I'm wrong seem to
Oh yeah,
be.
saying I'm wrong. That's a tough one too. But we've got to learn how to say I was wrong
Yeah.
and I'm sorry.
Yeah. Um, what would you say to a father who is maybe he sees that in himself and he sees that he really does want to do better as a father, but he struggles to really kind of put it into action. What are some things that you would say to him to kind of help him move forward with that?
Oh, good question. I would I would simply say it's easy to hear and hard to do.
Yeah.
I would say just be sincere, own it, and ask for help. Not necessarily outside help unless you need it, and there's no shame in asking for outside help.
Yeah.
We had a season in our marriage when my schedule was too busy and I was gone, 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 gone. Andrea's love language is quality time. And so
Mm,
it wasn't that I was just withdrawing, like I was going to the ATM and emptying it out
yeah.
by being away too much. And so all of that really did put a strain on our marriage. And I got to the point where I realized that really the best thing to do is to pare down the schedule, be home more. But then I told her point blank, I will get help. I will get therapy, counseling, whatever I need to make sure I make our family priority.
Yeah.
I don't want to mess what we have up. There's nothing wrong with admitting that. But I think when it comes to getting help is also asking from your wife and your children, I'm so sorry I blew it. How can I do better?
Mm,
And then just be willing to listen with a very open mind and open ears and not, I promise, as men, we have struggled with this. We justify. If they say something that, for example, I just wish when you came home you would be off the phone. Well, somebody has to pay for this house. And so I was on the phone trying to make some money so we could, all of that. They don't care about any of that.
yeah.
All they care is we just want you. We want you home.
Yeah.
So just listen. Don't argue. Don't justify. Don't fight back. Just listen. And then some of the things they say, they may be reasonable, they may not be, but at least we can try to come up to some agreement where we can do better, be better, instead of just feeling like our way is the only way, the right way. And if you don't like it, then it's your problem, not mine. Because eventually it
Yeah.
will be your problem. There'll be tension and
Yeah.
you'll find yourself just starting to part ways and disconnect emotionally, romantically, even physically. So
Yeah.
I would encourage every man, every dad, every husband to be willing to listen to their family. And when you're listening, don't be listening to respond.
Mm,
Just be listening to hear.
yeah.
And then take whatever time you need to respond. But don't be trying to come up with a quick, witty, clever either excuse
Yeah.
or response. Just listen to what they have to say.
Yeah. I that listening to understand is probably one of the hardest things to do, especially if you feel like you are in a position where you're justified in what you're doing and your actions. When you have that moment, you're like, you know what? I feel like I'm in a good position because I'm
Yes.
doing this because of A, B, C, D, and they're really good reasons. It can seem very difficult uh,
Yes.
to say in that moment, no, I am wrong. I do need to listen and try to figure this out. The other thing too is I know for us as
Absolutely.
fathers, I was talking to a young man not too long ago, and he was talking about social media, and he was like, "Well, like what they say on social media, this," and I'm like, "So that's not a good source to go to."
What do you mean? Are you telling me TikTok isn't always reliable?
Oh my word!
'Cause I get all my news off of TikTok. I mean, absolutely, it's
You're
unbiased, there's no agenda, it's all very objective.
you're well informed.
"Hi, I'm Mr. Naive. What's your name?"
But, we were talking about it, and he was, mentioning social media, and I was we were just kinda going through some things and trying to explain, and he got it, but it was like, social media is going to portray life a certain way because of the agenda, because
Mhm.
of you're gonna find some good stuff out there. I'm not saying there's not good stuff out there. Obviously, we're on social media.
Oh,
But,
absolutely.
when
Right.
it comes to your marriage, you can't
Yes.
rely on and your children, you can't rely on someone else's experience as far as, well, all women are this way or all men are this way or your children are always gonna want this or always gonna want
Oh,
that.
absolutely.
Having that conversation where you're listening
Right.
to hear what that person has to say and understand what they have to say. Me and my wife, we talked about it a lot, is the fact that we had to realize that we were communicating, and I've heard this before in books and people talking, but communicating on 2 different levels. I would say something and
Oh,
she
yeah,
would
absolutely.
hear something way different than what I said. And it took a while
Yes.
for us to have that conversation around, okay, so you said this. What did you mean by that when you said it?
Right.
Um, and
I
that
hear
for us was huge.
I don't know if this is a business thing or what it is, but I hear a lot of this in the business world where people say, "Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is,"
Yeah.
and then you respond with not just the words, but the tenor of those words. Like
Yeah.
we read that in Exodus 34, where the Bible says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, Write thou these words, for after the tenor of these words," that there is a feel or a tenor, a tremble to words that when you hear them, they may not mean what you think they mean.
Right.
We all know when a lady says, "Fine, fine, everything is fine," nothing is fine.
It's not.
So the words themselves they have a tenor.
Yeah.
And I don't do very well at this because I wasn't trained to do this, but I'm hearing it more and more in business, in ministry, even in counseling. Certainly, I'm hearing, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is, and then you
Right.
repeat back what you hear and give them a chance to say, no, that's not at all what I meant, or
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty much what I was trying to tell you. You
Yeah.
had mentioned also, like we use like generalities, for example. Men sometimes are apt to use generalities because we want to get our point across. We want to win the argument. So we say things like, well, you're never on time. We're always late for church.
Right.
And all she has to do, all the kids have to do is say, yeah, well, 6 years ago on a Wednesday night, we got there 5 minutes early.
Yeah.
And then your whole argument is invalid
Yeah.
because you went all in. You
Yeah.
went, we are always, or you never take out the trash. Well, actually, back in 1984, I took out the trash. So avoiding those generalities,
Right.
they help, whether it's the kids or spouse, it
Yeah.
helps to be able to avoid those and not use those because usually when we use those, we're exaggerating. We're trying to go overboard to get the point across and make somebody look worse than they really are.
Right.
And that's not loving.
Yeah. No, it's not at all. It's not at all.
Yeah.
Um, with that, as men, I mentioned a little earlier that sometimes people are like, you all are not emotional or men are not emotional. But I think any man who is honest would mention the fact that he is very emotional. we deal with it differently. I think I saw a video
Absolutely.
by TD Jakes, and he was talking about how women deal with things on the outside. So they're talking about it, they're talking through it, they're verbalizing what they're feeling. And
Sure.
men, we have a tendency, not all, but we have a tendency to when we're bothered by something, kind of go introvert and kind of deal with it
Sure.
internally. Um, when working through emotion,
Hmm.
what has been some things that you have found to kind of help, especially in a moment where you're trying to communicate, and maybe um, what you're trying to communicate or the situation you're in has caused emotions to rise on both sides? How have you found
Oh
to
yeah.
be
Yeah.
effective to bring it back down to where the emotions there, because both parties care, both people are in an emotional state
Right.
because something is important at that moment, and there are different places, but how have you found to be helpful to kind of bring it back down to where you can just communicate together effectively to kind of move that ball forward?
Well, I love how you said emotions are high because both parties care. You're absolutely right. I've heard people say things like love is the opposite of hate or hate is the opposite of love. I don't think that's the case. I think apathy, indifference is the
Mhm.
opposite of love because if I hate somebody, that means they've done something so egregious to me or about somebody I love that has caused me to feel this deep, deep emotion. But if I
Right.
didn't care about them, I really wouldn't care about them. I
Wow.
wouldn't even think about them. But if I constantly are mad at them, then they've disappointed me in some way, which meant I had higher regard for them than how they acted.
Yeah.
So to your point, when emotions are high, that is a good sign that both parties are wanting to care for each other. You just keep missing it and going to wrong levels. So one of the things I try to remember is I'm not always going to feel this way. Tomorrow morning, my emotions are going to be down to an even keel. We're going to get up in the morning and the girls are going to go down and we're going to get breakfast out of the pantry. I don't want it to be weird. I don't want
Yeah.
it to be awkward and tense. And so I have to remember that today is not the last day,
Mm.
probably. I mean, Jesus could come any day, but
Right.
likely today is not the last day. I won't always feel this fevered pitch of emotion. And so what I say and do in this moment, I will pay for tomorrow. And I don't want to pay for it. I
Yeah.
really don't. So I try to remember today is not the last day. I won't always feel this way. And I don't want to do anything or say anything I'm going to regret. I don't always hit that mark.
Yeah.
Sometimes life is so stressful that I'm not mad at them, but they're there. I take it out on them because they're basically collateral damage of an anger or a frustration at someone else or something else. They're the ones there, so they get the shrapnel. But I
Yeah.
don't want that to be the case. So that's one way I do it. Another way, I mean, just very practically speaking, I had a situation where it was like a road rage incident. We didn't do anything, but somebody got mad at us, and so they came in the
Mm.
restaurant where we were dining and just attacked us verbally. And I thought were going to attack us
Oh, wow.
physically. And man, I'm telling you, Brother Gray, my emotions, they skyrocketed in a second. It was like a missile. I just stood up, I looked at him, and I kind of bowed up, even though I mean I have arms just a little bit bigger than two slices of spaghetti. But I bowed up and it was like, let's go. And Andrea wisely, calmly
Yeah.
told me, she said, I had this. You didn't have to stand up for me, that kind of stuff. So I talked to my cop friends. I was a
Yeah.
chaplain in Ohio. And I talked to them. I said, how do you de-escalate a situation? Because I had
Mm.
what's called tunnel vision. I didn't know about any of this. They explained to me what happened. I said it was the weirdest thing. The room got small. My body temperature rose. All I saw was the person in front of me. That was
Yeah.
all I could see. Even though I was I'm in a restaurant full of people, plenty of square footage, I
Yeah.
felt like the room was closing in. And they said that's tunnel vision. That's part of the fight or flight response, the amygdala. That all you do is you zero in on the threat and attempt to
Right.
neutralize the threat. I'm not trying to kill her, but I'm trying to get out of there so neither she nor I are
Right.
hurt.
Yeah.
And so they explained what you need to do in that moment. Take a step back, take a look around. The room is still as big as it's ever been, still as many people in here as there were a minute ago. Breathe,
Yeah.
think, and then respond. And so I try to do that. I had not long after that, I had a moment where somebody made me mad and I wanted to lash out and I pop the pin, throw the grenade, and walk away. And instead, I took a step back. I looked around. The room was still big, and I responded. That's
Yeah.
one way I deal with charged emotion is
Mm,
physiologically, and then also just keeping in mind mentally, I won't always feel this way. And so I'll either pay for or benefit from the way
yeah.
I respond now. That will happen later.
That's good. That's good. I've heard of the stepping back physically from a situation in order
Yes.
to allow yourself to have that space to just kind
It's
of be able
weird,
to
man.
process it. And I know for us sometimes, yeah, I mean, just a change of body. I think I was
It's
watching.
so weird,
Is
bro.
the book is called? What is the book called? Um, I can't remember the name of the book. The author is Jocko Willink and Leif Babin.
Okay.
Extreme Leadership, and he was talking about
Okay.
as a leader that you have to step back sometimes,
Yes.
even physically, push yourself back away from a situation in order to get a better picture and get out of the emotion of it, and
E-
just
exactly.
you
All
don't think about that in the moment.
no, no. And the part of it I can't understand and can't explain is it's almost like pinching and zooming on a photo where all you don't see the edges anymore, and you hardly even see any of the negative
Yeah,
space behind the photo. All you see is the person right in front of you. So it really is like
yeah,
your mind, your brain pinches and zooms. So all you see is what you perceive to be a threat, and now your body is heightened, your senses, your sight, even your probably even your hearing to what they're saying,
yeah,
so you can process all of it and determine if I'm in danger, I'm out of here, or if I'm in danger, I'm fighting my way out of here. So
yeah,
that's just, it's amazing to me how God fearfully and wonderfully made us if we use it in the right way.
yeah,
But if we don't, and this is, I called this process popping the pin. If somebody attacked me verbally, what I would do is I would pop the pin, I would throw the grenade at them, I would say
yeah,
something, lash out, and I would walk away because I don't want to get the shrapnel. But I would leave them to just look down and see nubs on the floor for knees and be like, what happened there? But that's not loving, Christ like.
yeah,
And it's definitely not healthy,
no,
especially in the home, if they feel like they can never talk to me about something that might make me mad. And the next thing they know is I'm coming out of the corner swinging and popping pins. Then
right,
they're going to just leave me alone while they suffer in silence because don't make him upset. Because if you make him
yeah,
upset, he'll say something to or about you that he'll regret and will scar you. So we have to, as dads and husbands, be willing to just take a breath, take a step, take a beat, and think, will I want to pay for this tomorrow? Or will I benefit from what I say tomorrow?
yeah. Mm, that's good. That is so good. Well, sir, as we're wrapping up here,
Yes, sir.
I wanted to open up the floor and just kind of give you an opportunity. I know, we had our questions and stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
was there anything as you were preparing for this discussion and talk, was there anything that came to your mind that you want to share that maybe we didn't cover?
Yeah, I think the two things that I can think of are to be available, to be present at home, or you're on vacation, to stay off the phone, leave the laptop at work. Really, when it comes to your family, be present. Just enjoy your time with them. The other night, it was a pretty slow day. Thankfully, didn't have a whole lot of deadlines or things to do. So when I got home after dinner, we went downstairs. We played Super Mario Brothers for 3 hours. We had a blast. We had such a good time, and I was present.
Yeah.
I wasn't texting or looking at my phone during the times while somebody else is playing. I was there. We were having conversation, and the family loved that. So be present. Then the second thing would be when it's your time to listen, listen. Listen with your eyes. Make eye contact. Don't be looking around the room wondering what else is going on. Listen with your ears, obviously, to hear what's being said.
Yeah.
Listen with even your hands, that if something is very traumatic for somebody in your family, let's say your wife is going through a tough time or your daughters or sons are going through a difficult time, to put your hand on their shoulder or just hold them and let them know you're there and you're listening. Listen with your body language, with your
Yeah.
responses, even just to say, okay, and let them know you're hearing them, that what they're saying is
Yeah.
important to you and you value it. And then when it's time to respond, then respond. But really listen to understand and listen with all of those senses, so they know when they're talking to you, you're listening to them. But one of the highest compliments I ever had somebody pay me, and I'm not saying this for bragging because I don't always get it right, but one time I did. And this gentleman came to me. He said, "You know what? When I talk to you, I feel like I'm the only person in the world, and I've done my best to
Wow.
let that be a testimony that others can say, if I'm not a good speaker, if I'm not a good preacher, if I'm not a good storyteller, at least I can be a good listener." So that's one of my goals, is to be a good
Mm.
listener in this life, especially to my family. So those are my two tips for a healthy
Yeah,
home. How's that for alliteration?
that works. I appreciate it so much. Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
And I want to thank everybody for joining today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for
Thank
being a
you.
part of today. And I pray that as people listen to this, it's something that they can grow from and feel encouraged. As men, sometimes we can feel that we're in it all by ourselves and nobody else deals with what we're dealing with, or nobody else has those moments of outbreak or those moments of anger, or those moments of just messing it up royally. And hopefully, this will encourage someone to understand, they're not by themselves. So I really do
Absolutely.
appreciate you being here today.
This was my privilege. Thank you,
Well,
friend.
sir, thank you again. Before we do sign off, yeah, before
Yes.
we do sign off, you also have a podcast. I wanted to make sure we talked about that
Well,
before we
thank
signed
you.
off from everything. But you do have a podcast, Simplify. Yes, sir. And
Yes,
just want to give you an
absolutely. Thank you
opportunity to
so
talk
much.
about
Yeah,
that as
you can
well.
listen to Simplify. It's a devotional podcast. Each devotion is about, I don't know, somewhere between 8 and 10 minutes or so. So they're fairly short, but they're weekly. They drop every Sunday around noon Eastern time. Or no, I'm sorry, around 8 a.m. I'm sorry, around 8 a.m. on Sundays. And it's right now, I'm just walking through the book of beginnings, the book of Genesis, telling the story of the book of Genesis. So yeah, please hit me up on Simplify, Google Podcast, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. They're all there. So thank you. I feel like from a podcaster to a podcaster, it's almost like two guys exchanging jerseys at the end of the game. Like, here, you can have my jersey. So
Yeah.
I sincerely appreciate the plug.
Well, I
Thank
will
you.
say, yes, sir. I will say definitely from my standpoint, I've listened to Simplify, and I love. I know the name is Simplify, but I love how simple it is and how far you break it down to just bring understanding to things. And it's like we can overcomplicate the Bible sometimes. We can make it seem
Yes,
like it's this
absolutely.
really, and it is at points, it's deep, theological thing when it could
Sure.
be, hey, just communicate this one truth at a time. And I love how you
Absolutely.
break it down.
Absolutely.
So,
One truth at a time. Yes, sir. Yes, yes.
yes, sir. But again, thank you, sir, for joining. And we really do appreciate you being with us today.